candidate forum being held here in the historic, beautiful Duluth Playhouse Theater. It holds 280 attendees, and we are using it to its full capacity. For those of you who are listening on radio or watching this through one of our media outlets, just know that this is a full house here in this beautiful place. We are delighted to be able to partner the Duluth Area Chamber of Commerce with the Duluth Tribune to make this possible. We have done so on similar candidate debates over the years, and people have appreciated the fact that we take a very disciplined approach to this. The candidates and their teams appreciated it as well. We are delighted to have with us the three candidates. The Independence Party candidate, Ray Skip Sandman, the Democratic Party candidate, Joe Radinovich, and the Republican Party candidate, Pete Stauber. And I hope you got that out of you, because we have to go forward without that as we move through the questions. So if you would please refrain from doing that as we go forward, but appreciate your expressions of support. This forum is being broadcast today live by WDIO television and by My 9 television and by KBJR 6. And it is also, and by the Duluth News Tribune as well, who will have this on their website, so it's being streamed or broadcast by many different local outlets, which we appreciate. Our intention is to bring as much attention to these candidates as possible and to this event as possible. The Uptake organization is also streaming this live. Our friends at the Speak Your Piece, the Civility Project, you met them as you entered the theater today. They are working hard to make sure that they partner with us to have this be a very gracious and organized and civil debate, as we are confident it will be. But just in case that doesn't happen, we have three of the Duluth Police Department's finest officers. We have left nothing to chance. And all that has to happen is a nod from one of our moderators, and they have the instructions to respectfully guide out of this audience and this attendance the people that are causing any disruption. I am David Ross, President of the Duluth Area Chamber of Commerce, and joining me this morning is my co-moderator, Chuck Frederick. He is the editorial page editor for the Duluth News Tribune, and I will turn it over to Chuck at this time.
Thank you, David. I guess we don't get applause. That's okay. I just want to thank everyone for being here. As David said, it's a full house. Thank you for the folks watching online and on TV. The News Tribune is thrilled to again be co-hosting, co-moderating candidate debates this election season. It's a great opportunity for voters to hear from the candidates, hear directly from the candidates and their views. And we encourage everyone to vote on November 6th or sooner if you feel you're absolutely ready. I want to welcome our editorial board members. These candidate forums, in addition to being great information for the public, they do help to inform our editorials and our endorsements. They're not the only thing that inform our endorsements. I want to point out to the candidates, the most important person in the room to you is our timekeeper, front and center. She's waving at you there. And, of course, Bob King had to walk right in front of her. But she will warn you when you have 30 seconds left, 15 seconds left, and then when your time is up, we'll limit the questions to, or your answers, to 1 minute or 1.5 minutes. And then, again, another final reminder, as David, I think, stressed pretty strongly, we will not tolerate any outbursts, any cheers, any catcalls, any yells. We appreciate your civility and your decorum. David?
At this time, I invite the candidates to take up to 2 minutes each to introduce themselves, the central issues of their campaigns, and why these issues are important to them and to our district. The candidates' names have been placed in a hat and pulled out, so, and to determine the order of opportunity. And first will be Mr. Stauber, so if you would please proceed.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank David and the Chamber and Chuck and the Duluth News Tribune for putting on this forum. And of course, to the audience members and those listening online and watching. And to Joe and Skip, I appreciate this opportunity to have this debate with you. I'm looking forward to a healthy debate, and I think it's important that the voters understand what we stand for and what we're going to do in Congress. My name is Pete Stauber, and I can tell you this, I've worn a lot of uniforms in my life, that of being a professional hockey player, a small business owner, and a police officer for 22 years right here in the city of Duluth. But I can tell you that there's no uniform that's more important to me than that of being a husband and a father of four. When my wife Jody was serving over in Iraq, I had a lot of time to think after I played the role of mom and dad for the day. When I tucked them in, I said two prayers.
The first was that Jody would return home safe, and the second one was that my children would have the same opportunities and dreams and hopes that I had. That's why I'm running for Congress, to ensure that our children and grandchildren have those same opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you, Pete. Yes, second up will be Mr. Sandman.
Well, hello, my name is Ray Skip Sandman, and first of all, I want to take this time here and acknowledge the veterans that are in the audience here today. I want to say thank you for your service. I've been there. I am a Vietnam vet with 2 tours, a retired corrections officer, and I also culturally and spiritually believe is that our future generations are what matter. I'm running for Congress not for myself, but for them. What is our legacy going to be to our children? I also believe is that democracy needs to be back in the hands of the people and not into the big donations, people that give all the big money. I love to be able to share your voice in Congress, your concerns, rather than a corporate or a lobbyist. That's what I bring, and that's why I'm running. It's not for me, it's for you, your future, and your future generations of your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren. I'm also a father. I've been married for coming up on 30 years. I have 6 children, 16 grandchildren. So I know what Pete was just saying here is praying for their safety and their well-being. But also, what will we leave them in the future? That's why I'm running. That's why I'm sitting on this stage here, because I care about you, the average person. The person that works their butt off to try to get ahead. That's why I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Radinovich.
Well, thank you, David, and thank you to the Duluth Chamber of Commerce. Thank you to Chuck and to the Duluth News Tribune. I want to thank Pete and Skip for being here today, and I want to thank all of you for being in the audience and for listening online. My name is Joe Radinovich. I'm the 4th generation of my family to grow up on the Cuyuna Iron Range. I'm a proud graduate of Crosby-Arrington High School. I come from a family of miners, electricians, plumbers, pipe fitters, nurses, and other healthcare workers. They're the type of hardworking people who recognize that you go to work to make sure that you can take care of yourself, to take care of the people you love, and to take care of your community. They recognize the dignity that comes from that. But the nature of work is changing. In 1980, there were 14,500 iron miners producing 40 million tons of ore in northeastern Minnesota. Today, that same 40 million tons of ore takes 4,000 iron miners. That's 10,000 people who used to be able to walk out of high school and onto a job that would support themselves and their family. But it's not limited to mining. It's happening on farms and factories, it's happening on the highways, and it's happening at the grocery store. The story of our economy is that we as a nation are more productive and wealthier than we have ever been before. And yet working people are losing ground. Wages have been flat for 4 decades. I propose that we take our government back and focus on 3 specific areas: The first is retirement security. That means Social Security, Medicare, pensions, and the unions that fought for them. The second is in investments in the people and places of this country. That means to get to work building infrastructure and making childcare, health care, and education more affordable for every working family. And the third is that we need to take back our government. We need to wrestle control from the special interests in Washington, D.C., and invest power in the people in rooms just like this. That's why I'm in this election. That's why I'm seeking your support. And that's why I'm excited to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Gentlemen, we have quite a number of issues we want to get to this morning, very important issues. But we made a decision here that we want to, right at the outset here, get it out of the way, address some of the elephants in the room, the use of emails, issue traffic tickets, drug paraphernalia. There'll be no rebuttals from the candidates on these, but we want to give the candidates a minute and a half to address this and get it behind us, and then we can move on. Mr. Sandman, we're going to start with you, sir. As a third-party candidate, we're curious how you try to rise above the political mudslinging that tends to ensnare the major party candidates, and how do you effectively get your message across?
Well, one of the things I don't indulge in slinging not-so-good stuff at each other. I respect both these gentlemen, and I'm sure both of these gentlemen have made mistakes and have done very good positive things in their past. In that past, at times, and especially in the political arena, comes back to bite you in the butt. Joe and his speeding tickets, and Pete with his emails. I mean, if everybody digs deep, you're going to find something on everybody. Because there's not one of us in this room that hasn't done something a little tainted in their past. But to use that to slander and sling mud in their face is not right. That's why I don't engage in that. It's not productive. Joe has his issues. Pete has his issues. I have my issues. But I will not lower my standards to get into that. And with both gentlemen here and the outside parties that are shoveling in that hate speech and the mudslinging, you guys ought to call them up and say, stop it. Stop it. This is not what democracy is about. An outside party, whoever it may be, trying to control what happens here in the 8th Congressional District. I believe we are strong enough to say no. I believe that. And I'm sure as I'm sitting here right before you, there's some group out there trying to get the goods on me. Only trouble is, I'll be honest, the only things I've ever done wrong in my life is 2 speeding tickets, one in Garrison and one in Frederick, Wisconsin. So.
Thank you very much. I do appreciate that you guys understand that this is a chance to address these things head on rather than ignoring them and letting them live in the ether. Mr. Radinovich, you next, sir. I'm sorry. After news broke about dozens of traffic infractions, the News Tribune asked if there's anything else of concern in your background, and you at that time said no. And it was after that the run-in with police over the possession of drug paraphernalia came to light. Your responses on those things coming up and how they're coming up, and is there anything else?
Well, my folks and everybody else in the audience, so if there is, I think I should talk to them privately first. But no, so, you know, what I want to say is that my life, and I'll talk more about this over the course of this debate, has been marked by some pretty stark highs and lows. And along the way, I've made mistakes, and I've had a lot of success too. And when it's come to my mistakes, I've owned up to them, I've been responsible for them, I've answered the questions. Specific to the parking and traffic tickets, there were a lot of them, and some of them were paid late, but they're parking and traffic tickets, and everybody has them. The marijuana paraphernalia ticket was when I was 18 years old. I was pulled over in Deerwood, Minnesota. I was respectful and cooperative with the officer, and the judge and the court saw fit to dismiss the ticket. You can't find it on my record, which speaks, I think, to the nature of our political system today. You had to dig pretty deep to find that in my past, and I think that that's appropriate that that was dismissed, because we've seen that attitudes have shifted a lot over the last decade and a half on this issue, and that everybody, I believe, deserves to have a second chance to make good on their life. And that's what I've been given. That's why I'm fighting in this. I want to point out that being transparent and open and honest and taking responsibility for these things has been a hallmark of my campaign. And I think that everybody in dealing with these should respond in the same way.
Thank you very much. Finally, Mr. Stauber, you've been accused of inappropriately using St. Louis County resources, including your email, for campaign purposes. You've also been criticized for standing with President Trump. Your responses, sir?
So the county had the responsibility to look to the emails. They did so. They determined there was no wrongdoing and cleared the matter. When President Trump came here, I was privileged to bring him to Minnesota in the 8th District to show him our port, our wood products, and forest management, and talk about the mining that is critically important to this community. And it is no coincidence that just recently President Trump reversed the mining ban.
Thank you to all three of you. We'll have a minute response to this next question with an opportunity for a 30-second rebuttal from each of you. The question is, federal funding for the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative remains uncertain. How do you feel about this initiative, and how high a priority will you make the Great Lakes? And we'll start with Mr. Radinovich.
Well, I've had like many people in this room, special relationship with the outdoors here in Minnesota, and Lake Superior, as the greatest of the Great Lakes, is a special part of that. When I was a kid, we used to go up to Two Harbors, where my stepmother's family lived, and up to Gooseberry Falls, and all the places along the North Shore. And so these are special places. I recognize the importance of investing in restoration to make sure that these assets are preserved for future generations. And I recognize that that's going to take resources. And I think that the question that we're going to be evaluating over the course of this campaign is, how do we pay for the things that we recognize are priorities in this district? The big issue in this country, I think, is that in February we passed a tax bill that gives most of the money to corporations and the richest, and at the same time it's going to drive the deficit to $1.1 trillion. And so priorities in the context of all the money being missing are an important question here. But I support that initiative, and I support the funding necessary to complete it.
Thank you. Mr. Stauber.
Well, the Great Lakes Restorative Initiative, as you know, in our president's first budget had zero money. Had I been in Congress at the time, I would have fought like tooth and nail to fully fund it. The Great Lakes is Lake Superior, and the other Great Lakes are an economic engine for our region. And I myself attended Lake Superior State University in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan. I saw those ore carriers come through the Soo Locks. I understand that Lake Superior must remain clean, and it's commerce, it's recreation, and it's a part of our economy. And so if I go to Congress, I will ensure that I will work hard to make sure that the funding is there for the Great Lakes.
Thank you. Mr. Sandman.
Well, I fully support that initiative on that because water is life. Lake Superior is very important. The watershed around Lake Superior is very sacred. We need to protect that for future generations. You look right outside here, we got 10% of the world's fresh water. If we don't protect it, how often or how soon would corporations pollute that? So we need to fight that tooth and nail. And when I'm elected in the Congress, I will make that a priority, is water is part of our environment. Without water, we don't survive. Without water, it damages everything. All our economics is based here is on our water. Our tourism, everything. People come here for that. You know, it's not anything else. They love seeing the lake. So, thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Radinovich, any final thought on this?
No.
Okay. Mr. Stauber?
No, all I'll say is when my wife returned from Iraq late on a Friday night, the next morning we had to take our family and go sit in Lake Superior on Brighton Beach. That's how important it is to our family, and I think this region.
Thank you. Mr. Sandman, final thought?
Without water, what do we have? We need to protect it. We need to utilize it to the best that it takes care of us. We need to take care of it. So no price is too high to make that happen.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. Gentlemen, the separation of families at our southern border has received much attention. The calls for building a wall has received attention. Curious, in your minds, what are the issues related to immigration that most affect the 8th District, and what congressional actions would you support or will you support as congressman to address those issues? Mr. Stauber, we'll start with you, sir.
Well, I think that when we talk about immigration reform, the very first thing we have to do is talk about credibility on our borders in order for us to even start the conversation. And the folks involved with DACA, they came to this country through no fault of their own. Young kids, and I think it was important that we show them our country's values and that we care for them. And I think that as we talk about border security, there's levels of border security that I think we can use. We could use 21st century drones. We can use electronic surveillance, and sometimes a wall in certain areas will keep our borders secure. The whole goal is to try to have official ports of entry so we don't have illegal drugs, illegal immigrants, and human trafficking coming across our borders. Those are devastating to our communities.
Thank you. Mr. Saman?
I believe in immigration because immigration is what made this country great. We don't need a border in the south or a border in the north, but we do have to properly vet people, you know. In fact, when you actually look at immigration, there's about 600,000 Europeans that have overstayed their visit, but I don't hear anything on the news or out of the administration sending them back to Europe and the European countries. So I think what we got going on here is a couple things. If you're brown, you're going down. And that has got to stop because that's not what American is about. Every last one of you people sitting here in this audience, if you're not Native American, you are immigrants. You are descended from immigrants. Did anybody stop you? Your ancestors. Did anybody? Ask yourself. So why do we sit and judge? Proper vetting is necessary, but it's a waste of money, it's a waste of time, and it's a waste of our natural resources to try to stop a person that has a different color skin from coming here. They're coming here for the same reasons your ancestors did. They wanted prosperity and a life that is not being prosecuted or persecuted. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Radinovich.
The Radinovich family came from Yugoslavia about 105 years ago. I'd tell you which countries, but I don't want to start a fight in the audience. And they settled on the Iron Range in Eveleth at a time when you might see on doors up there signs that said no Finns or no Indians. And I think that what we have to keep in context is that we all, except for our indigenous communities here, have an immigrant story in our background. The values that we've learned from that are very important. It's about inclusion. It's about effort to get into society. It's about opportunity. When it comes to immigration reform, what we need are bipartisan solutions. We need Republicans and Democrats to come together to recognize the opportunity this country has always represented to ensure that we have safe borders, but that we're focusing our resources on the places that matter. Most of the people who enter this country illegally overstay legally issued visas. And so to build walls on our borders, both northern and southern, is what I've heard my opponent, Pete Stauber, say, would be a waste of our resources. We can target them better to make sure that we have safety in this country. That's what we need.
Thank you very much. Pete, do you want to follow on that?
Yeah, 23 years ago I took an oath to defend the Constitution and enforce the laws of the state of Minnesota. We are a nation of law and order. I've said this in the past, I support legal immigration where the immigrant wants to come to our country and live the American dream and contribute. In fact, in the early 80s, husband and wife from Poland. They recently got married. 2 weeks before martial law in the Soviet bloc was enacted, the husband came to this country. The wife came 2 years later. They had 2 children. They settled in outskirts of Chicago. He was a tile setter. I hired his daughter to work with me on the campaign. That's the legal immigration that we want.
Thank you. Mr. Samian, as a follow-up to your comments, how would you as congressman work through the racism and the politics of immigration to get to solutions?
What I'll bring to the floor is that working with bipartisan to make sure that the proper vetting procedures are done and that it is equal and it is just. You know, I've heard some things now that said is that, okay, what they're looking at is you got to have a job and actually to get in here. But when the doors are closed, sometimes we are cutting off the best that comes to this country. Now, some people cannot go behind, get behind the color of the skin, which is wrong.
Thank you. Mr. Radinovich, the same question, cutting through the politics to get to solutions. How would you do that?
Well, I think we've seen it done in this country before. There have been bipartisan comprehensive immigration reforms plans proposed in this country, and they generally have a couple features. The one is that we need to have a responsible path to citizenship. There are millions of people in this country right now who are here in an undocumented status, and they're living in the shadows, and the fact that they can be exploited for their labor brings down American wages. It endangers us and our communities. What we need to do is make sure that we show the dignity for those human lives and make sure that they have a responsible path to citizenship, that we secure our borders, not with a border wall, which will take up to $20 billion and much more on the northern portion, but instead with targeted, focused efforts to make sure that we're targeting where people are coming in illegally, which again is through visas issued usually in a legal manner.
Thank you. David.
This may be the one issue that clearly separates Mr. Sandman from the two of you. So I will begin with Mr. Sandman. In the face of more than a decade of an environmental review and overwhelming expert and scientific opinion that the Polymet project can be done responsibly and safely, on what do you base your opposition to copper nickel mining, Mr. Sandman?
Number one, it's never safe. That type of mining is not safe in a water-rich environment. If you noticed within the last 5 years or so, our water is increasing. We have floods now, which makes it much more dangerous. And the other thing, and I'm going to beat up on Glencore, because there's been no written agreement with any union as for wages. So what makes you think is that they're going to be living wages? Glencore has a history of economical disasters everywhere they have tried their mining, and also of union busting. It started out a long time ago with 300 to 500 jobs up there in the Iron Range. Now it's down to 100 to 250, but automation is killing the jobs. We sit here and we worry about Glencore or Polymet, but we're not hearing anything about they're taking their processing plant and putting it in Canada. Now that's losing 40 jobs. That ain't treating the Iron Range miner with respect. They're just doing it. So that type of mining, nickel copper sulfide mining, cannot be done safely at this point in history because the science is outdated. And if they ship the ore north in our water-rich environment, what happens if it rains on it?
Mr. Sandman, your time is up.
Thank you.
Mr. Radinovich, on what specifically do you base your support for copper nickel mining?
Well, I come from a family of miners. The first three generations of my family worked in the iron mines in northeastern Minnesota, and so I recognize the value and economic opportunity to families and communities that sometimes these jobs can pose. What I also recognize is that we have important issues for which we have to wrestle with in terms of how we're going to source the things that we need for life in the 21st century. And the role of government, and this is a distinction that I would draw, is the role of government is to make sure that people have faith in the process by which these things are evaluated. And that's what I've based my position on, is making sure that we can invest integrity into the process. That means that there have been times when I've agreed with people who, who support copper nickel mining unqualified, and there are times that I disagree. And so the role of government, the role of the person representing this district, I think, is not to be a company man, and it's not to be an errand boy for corporate interests, but instead to make sure that we're upholding the laws that are on the books. Any project that can be done safely should be allowed to proceed, but we need to make sure that we're holding those standards in a high regard.
Thank you. Mr. Stauber, on what specifically do you base your support for copper nickel mining?
Well, the PolyMet project has been in the permitting phase for close to 14 years now. It will meet every federal and state environmental regulation. Otherwise, they won't be able to mine the copper nickel. And I think that very soon that PolyMet, the DNR, is going to give them their permit to mine. We can do it safely, and we can keep our water and air clean. We have regulatory agencies that are following this process, and we can do it. It's going to bring good paying jobs to the Iron Range, and it's going to be an economic boom. The economics that will be brought to the Iron Range, over $505 million a year. That's like bringing the Super Bowl to the Iron Range. It's going to be a boom. It's going to be good paying jobs, and we can do it safely. If they don't meet the regulations and don't meet the environmental standards, they won't be able to do it. And so I'm the only one in this campaign that has stated I support iron ore, copper nickel mining, and Enbridge Line 3 without hesitation, because I know that they can do it safely.
Thank you. Mr. Sandman, final thoughts?
It cannot be done safely at this point in time. You know, I look at what do we got to lose if we go with that copper nickel mining. We lose a lot. We lose the watershed when it does spill, because anything by man wears down. The financial insurance will not be there. If they go bankrupt in 20 years, they pull their money out. It's not safe, not at this time, not at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Sandman. Mr. Radinovich, final thought on mining.
Yeah, I come from a family of miners. My great-grandfather came here from Yugoslavia. My grandfather mined in the Cuyuna and on the Masabi Range in Africa for 6 years with the family. I recognize the value of mining. I've got iron ore in my veins. I've got it on my clothes. And if I'm honest, I've had it on my tires as a teenager. But the question isn't whether it can be done safely as a blanket statement. The question is whether we're going to have somebody who is going to make sure that these companies in each specific project proposal are going to meet every standard. And so a blanket statement about support, I think, belies the fact that these are each individual complex projects, and they each need to be held to a high standard.
Thank you. Mr. Stauber, final thought.
Yeah, they are going to be held to that standard, Joe. Otherwise, we're not going to give them a permit. You can't be for it and against it. Either you support it and they meet the permits, or you don't.
When did I say I was against it?
You've been doing the Texas two-step in this entire campaign. Either you support copper nickel mining, or you don't.
I've said consistently that as long as they can meet the standards that are on the books,
They will.
projects can go forward. How do you know they will? You're not in a position to evaluate it.
When the
Please,
DNR,
please,
wait a
gentlemen.
minute, when the DNR gives the permit, we trust the federal regulation and the state regulations so they can mine safely. We all want clean air and water.
Mr. Stauber, thank you. Mr.
Thank you.
Radinovich, you can tell this is an issue that will warrant more discussion as they go forward within the campaign. We'll turn it over to Chuck.
Well, thank you, David. Candidates, health care. Despite the Affordable Care Act's laudable goal of ensuring all Americans, the uninsured rate in Minnesota is on the rise, we recently learned, and the cost to consumers has never been higher. How do you support fixing health care? I know you only have 1 minute, but also addressing mental health. How do you fix it before it bankrupts all of us? Mr. Radinovich.
This, I think, is the most important issue facing people across the 8th Congressional District. No matter where we go, we hear from people that healthcare costs are out of control. I talked to a woman in Chisholm the other day. Her name was Dawn. She said that her dad is paying $200 for each vial of insulin right now. That man is going to be making decisions about whether he can afford to heat his house this winter or take the medicine that he needs to live. This is an existential crisis, and it's impacted my life because when I went through my worst moments, it was because my dad had a good union healthcare job that made sure that I got the care that I needed when I needed it. We are the richest and most productive nation in the world. We are the only industrialized nation that doesn't provide universal health care for each of its citizens. We spend more than any other country in the world, by the way, $10,300 per person, and we don't see any better results. There are still 30,000 people in this country who don't, 30 million, excuse me, who don't have access to health care. This is a crisis on our hands, and we have gone in the wrong direction. The Republican health care bill that was passed this year will put 300,000 people just in this district alone in danger of losing their health care because they have pre-existing conditions through no fault of their own. That's what's at stake here.
Mr. Stauber.
The last time we gave the healthcare keys to Representative Radinovich at the time, he drove us right over the cliff with MNsure. Skyrocketing prices, hundreds of thousands of Minnesotans lost their jobs. Furthermore, lost their health care, I should say. Furthermore, Joe, you voted when the premiums were skyrocketing and the MNsure website was broken. You voted to give undeserving MNsure executives taxpayer-funded bonuses. That was a disaster. We are still trying to come out of that. Before, we had Minnesota Care. It wasn't perfect, but it was very good. In fact, there were other states trying to look at examples of our Minnesota Care, how it's helped the poor to be able to afford health insurance. And so for you to sit here and say that we need universal health care, we can't afford to give you the keys of the nation's health care.
We'll let you address that in just a second. First, Mr. Samian.
First of all, what I'll do when I'm elected to Congress is push forward a bill of single-payer health care. Health care in this country is a right, not just for the privileged. And there's all these details that need to be worked out with that. And I know it's not going to happen overnight, but that's what I'll be pushing for because it is a basic human right. You know, my wife is looking at a surgery in a couple of weeks that's going to cost about $200,000. And if we didn't have health insurance, that would come out of our pocket. And I'm a fortunate one. I have health care. What happens to Mr. Joel on the street that can't afford it? We need that in this country right now. Universal health care is BS, okay? There's not a thing written on Joe's webpage about single-payer health care. There's nothing that's written. So that tells me where this gentleman stands at. Single-payer health care in this country, we need to go forward with that. Get over the walls.
Thank you very much. Mr. Radinovich, you're coming out of your chair to respond.
Yeah. I'll address Skip's thing first. I've said it at every event I've been at. It's on every piece of literature. I'm clearly in favor of single payer. And to Pete's point, I haven't heard one single idea that came from you during that diatribe that put forward a plan that was going to ensure anybody in this country. The Affordable Care Act increased the share of people who were afforded insurance in this country. You know, everywhere I go across this district, there are farmers paying $40,000 for health care on the individual market. There are people bargaining contracts, steel workers right now on the Iron Range, who are being asked for concessions because health care costs are rising unsustainably. We have to have a solution in this country for this. And the issue is that we pay more than any other country in the world. Private insurance companies run at 13 to 18% overhead, while public programs like Medicare administer at 5%. Our health care money is going to too many places that are not care related. It's going to executive bonuses, advertising, going to lobbyists, and going to contributions to politicians from the insurance and pharmaceutical companies, just like you, Pete.
Can I respond? Yeah.
Go ahead.
The Medicare for All scheme is a $33 trillion full throttle government takeover of health care. people on Social Security and our veterans would be kicked off their health care altogether. And you can shake your head, Joe, but that's the fact. You don't even know how you're going to pay for it. The bottom line is, this is what we need to do. We need to get together. The fact of the matter is, health care is not going to be solved by bantering like this. It's going to be solved by the Republicans and Democrats getting together and not caring who gets the credit. And I can assure you, if I'm elected to Congress, I'm not only going to reach across the aisle, I'm going to get up and walk over and legislate for the people of this country.
Thank you, Mr. Sandman. You get the final 30 seconds.
Okay, final 30 seconds. Well, with single-payer health care, if you talk about funding for it, first of all, let's take the money away from the top 1%. This tax break that the president just gave them. Let's take it back, put it into something that will benefit us all rather than 1/10%. We need it in this country. It is a basic right. How do we do this? We start redirecting the funds that are being wasted through pork belly stuff in the 1% in the tax breaks for the corporations. We start bringing it back to we, the people. We, the people. Not 1%, the Cook brothers, Walmart, all the other corporations up there that are getting subsidies from us.
Thank you, Mr. Sandman.
You get me excited here.
Please give examples of infrastructure projects in our district in need of funding from the federal government and speak to your view of those projects. We'll start with Mr. Stauber.
Thank you very much. That's a great question. You know, infrastructure is aging not only in our region but across the country. And I sit on the Seaway Port Authority Board, and one of the interesting facts is what we call the can of worms, the Twin Ports Interchange Project. We have to be able to develop that so trucks and windmills coming out of the port can be done so in a way that is safe for everybody, so that that exchange will help the free flow of traffic, not only for the safety of the motorists, but the Port Authority is really incredibly important. And once that interchange is done, I think that it will help the port for sure, especially with the projects they have going on.
Thank you, Mr. Stauber. Mr. Sandman.
Could you read the question?
Yes, related to infrastructure projects in our district that you're aware of that are in need and the funding from the federal government, your view of that.
Well, number one, we need to take a look at our roads and our bridges. You know, that is, with this climate that we live in up here, takes its toll. So the infrastructure of the roads and the bridges are number one of priority. The other priority is a job bill that puts people to work so that we can utilize our workers here in Minnesota and in the 8th District in the city of Duluth. By utilizing that and sending funds in, maybe we can, I don't know if anybody remembers the old CETA programs, putting people back to work, strengthening unions, starting to build that infrastructure of stability in our own district here. Funding is available. In fact, the state of Illinois has that type of funding. It was called the CETA program way back when, and basically it ran out of money. But to refund that and bring it back so that we can really work on the infrastructure of what makes Minnesota great.
Thank you, Mr. Sandman. Mr. Radinovich.
I was in Nashwauk the other night. Pete was there too, actually. And I was talking to a friend of mine named Marcus, and he had a close friend who wanted to move back to the Iron Range. And the reason he wanted to move back is because he had a job that he could do from anywhere in the country, a good high-paying job. And so he wanted to live on the lake up there. The problem was is that he couldn't find a lake house out where he was looking that had access to high-speed internet. And so I think rural broadband, border-to-border broadband, is the single most important infrastructure that we could pass in the 21st century. To me, it's the equivalent to the rural electrification project. Beyond that, when we're talking about some of the more traditional infrastructure projects, there's the Cross Range Expressway, there's the harbor project that Pete mentioned, there's the Northern Lights high-speed rail program that would bring people from the Twin Cities to Duluth. I think all of those are important. I also want to just backtrack 1 second. So the healthcare plan that we've talked about has been talked about at the cost that Pete said, which was $32 trillion, but the current cost of healthcare in this country is $3.4 trillion per year. So if you take that projection over the next 10 years, the cost of our current healthcare system will be more expensive than the highest estimate for universal healthcare in this country, and that's a fact.
Thank you. And Mr. Stauber, please. No, please.
No, Dave.
Mr.
David,
Stauber, too. Now you can respond to either infrastructure or healthcare with your response.
I'm going to do both. I'm going to do both. Putting 336 million Americans on a government-run healthcare, Joe, is destined to fail. Now, what reference infrastructure? Congressman Nolan, to his credit, has really worked hard to replace the pole lock in the Sault Ste. Marie. That's critically important. And when I'm elected and go to Congress, I want to finish that because 13% of the gross domestic product comes out of this region and flows through Lake Superior. So that's a really important project for our economy up here.
Thank you. Mr. Sandman, final thought?
Final thought is when you talk about health care, I'll get on that one. When you talk about health care, we need that. It is a basic human need, not just for a privileged. You talked about 333 million people going on will bust the system. I don't believe that. I don't believe that. That is lobbyist, corporation, rhetoric to keep us scared and keep us stepping forward. And the high-speed trains and stuff like that would definitely help because there's 17,000 jobs, indirect or direct jobs from that, but at a cost of $2 billion. We can do it.
Thank you, Mr. Sandman. You get one more run at this, Mr. Radinovich. 30 seconds.
I'll take it and put it back on topic here. So when we talk about infrastructure in this country, that was one of the things that President Trump brought up in the 2016 election, that he would want to make some investments in. And I agree with that. I think we need to put people to work rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure across this country. But the issue is this, that tax bill is going to inflate our deficit in the next year to $1.1 trillion. It's a tax giveaway to the wealthiest and to the corporations in this country. 80% of the benefit will go to the top 1% of income earners, and we now can't find the money to invest in the infrastructure that we were promised. That's the issue. It's about priorities.
Time, please, and Chuck.
Thank you, David. I'm supposed to ask about something else, but maybe you want to talk healthcare later, or
Yeah.
you know what? I would. I'd like to give the candidates each 30 more seconds. In just 30 seconds, please respect our timekeeper. And Mr. Stauber, just 30 seconds on healthcare, just to wrap it up. Let's wrap up that issue.
I want to talk about the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. On average, Minnesota families will be saving, in the 8th District, will be saving $2,500. That's real money. I understand for the coastal elites and the Hollywood liberals that $2,500 isn't a lot of money. But that can be house payments, car payments, and others to be able to spend the way we want and not the government. I trust the people keeping more money in their pocket than giving it to the government. See, we don't have a revenue problem.
Mr. Sandman, just 30 more seconds. Sorry, Pete. 30 more seconds on healthcare or whatever you want.
Whatever you want. All right. The thing being is with health care, we need it. You know, Joe says $1.4 trillion. How much are we giving away to corporations? How much are we giving away to big business? How many billions and billions of dollars? We just redirect that money to what is needed in this country. And single-payer health care is that need. Not for me, but for all you and your children.
Mr. Radinovich, last 30 seconds, and I'm going to move on to the next topic. It's a good one, too. So
I'll take the chance to talk about health care. I know we're going to be able to talk about the tax bill here, But I just want to point out that my opponent, Pete Stauber, has had 2 minutes now to talk about health care and has not put forth one single idea that would result in coverage for more Americans. Not one single idea on the issue that most people in this district identify as their top concern. That's the issue here. We have an ability in the richest and most profitable nation in the world to make sure that everybody has access to health care. And the human impact of not allowing people to have access to affordable care is real. It impacted my life, and that's what we need to make sure is that everybody has access when they need it.
Thank you. Candidates, the tragedy of gun violence has touched you on stage, those of you who are on stage. How can we stop the bloodshed? What needs to happen? Mr. Salmon, we'll begin with you.
Well, one of the things when you talk about gun violence, we need to really take a look at not banning guns, but making it by reinstating the 1994 assault weapons ban and machine pistols, and the modifications has put a stop to them. You know, I'm not advocating taking anybody's gun rights away, Second Amendment, but we need to be honest with ourselves. No more Parkland shootings, no more Columbine, no more Red Lake. You know, we need to have a serious discussion and serious thought on the type of weapons that are being sold and closing the loopholes at gun shows. I'm for a longer waiting period. I'm also for, just like if you get a car, you have to prove that you can operate that car fluently so that you can drive on the streets. Same thing with gun rights.
Thank you.
Violence.
Mr. Radinovich?
So gun violence is something that's impacted many people in this room, probably many people in our communities, and it's impacted my life. When I was 17 years old, I walked in on a family member attempting to kill himself. And 11 months after that, my mother was murdered, shot to death by a family member in my kitchen. And I recognized the impact that has on individual lives. And the solutions, I think, to those situations look different from one another. When we talk about suicide, which are 60% of the gun deaths in this country, we need to talk about access to mental health care. We need to talk about making sure that people in crisis don't have access to firearms. When we talk about the homicides in this country, we recognize that they disproportionately happen in some places or in some situations. And recognizing that people who are prone to domestic abuse shouldn't have firearms is an important piece of that. Beyond that, I support common sense gun reforms, because you can be a gun owner and a hunter like I am still today and support those common sense reforms, including universal background checks, ban of bump stocks, ban on high-capacity magazines.
Thank you. Mr. Stauber?
Thank you. As a 23-year law enforcement officer, I can say that I've experienced gun violence myself. In December of 1995, I was shot in the head while off duty. A couple years later, at 1820 London Road, I was in a hostage situation on duty, and from 5 feet away, an individual came, pulled a handgun on me, pulled the trigger, and by the grace of God, it didn't go off. I was fighting for my life. Now, with that being said, the gun reforms, the suicides, the murders, and what have you, it's unconscionable. We have to start respecting life, respecting one another. And Joe brings up a good point, and he and I will agree on this. We have to stop saying and putting a stigma on mental health. Mental health, we have to make sure that we take care of these people who are going through crisis. And there is nobody that wants a drug dealer to possess or own a firearm. There's nobody that wants a gang member. There is nobody that wants a career criminal. There's nobody that wants folks that shouldn't have firearms to have them. And I think it's up to us to have that common sense solution to say we need to keep the firearms out of those folks' hands. But there are a couple of...
Thank you.
I'm out of time. Okay.
Thank you very much. We have just a few minutes left, and so we're going to bring this to the concluding comments. And so we will conclude our forum with each candidate offering his closing comments, and we'll start with Mr. Radinovich, if you would, and then please, 2 minutes each, because that's all we have.
Well, thank you, David. Again, thank you to the Duluth Chamber of Commerce, and thank you to Chuck, and thank you to the Duluth News Tribune. Thank you, everybody, for being here today, for listening online. Thank you to Pete and Skip. You see that there are some clear differences between us as candidates up here, and those differences are important. And the question that I think everybody should ask when they go to the voting booth is, who are you for? And there's an important difference in those things. The people who are putting those ads on TV running against me are the people who are supporting Pete Stauber. Pete Stauber and his supporters believe that we should be cutting Social Security and Medicare to pay for tax giveaways for the wealthiest people in this country. That's a true fact. The Speaker of the House said it, and the President's economic advisor said it. They sure did. I believe that we need to protect those programs for future generations, that they've lifted generations of people out of poverty. Pete Stauber and the people paying for those ads, they believe that they support a health care plan that would endanger 300,000 people in this district with pre-existing conditions, making health care unaffordable or unattainable for them. I believe that we need to use the wealth and the productivity of this nation to make sure that everybody has access to affordable health care, and we can do it through a universal system. Pete Stauber and the people that are paying for those ads, they believe that we should allow millionaires and billionaires to run our democracy unfettered, that we should have no regulation on those types of ads, on that type of spending. I don't take a dime in corporate PAC money, and I never will, because the integrity of our government is too important. I believe that we need to wrestle power away from the special interests in this country and reinvest it in the people just like you in rooms just like this. If we do that, then we will be on the right track in this country. We will see our middle class grow. That's what's at stake in this election. That's why this is so important. That's why I'm here asking for your support, and I look forward to the debates to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Radinovich. And Mr. Sandman.
In this country, what we do every day is we get up and we lock ourselves in boxes or in prisons. We don't think outside the box. We believe what our neighbor says down the street or what we hear on the media, and our thoughts are programmed that way, so everything that we do is programmed to a point of what we are to believe, what we're supposed to think, what we're supposed to buy. You know, you look at this race. It is the 8th Congressional District. Now you got the blue that wants to take it over. You got the red that wants to take it over. But what it is we're Americans. We are even divided in our political parties because we think we're going to get the upper hand on everything. We need to step outside of that box because as an American citizen, I'm talking to you as an American citizen. You don't have to be programmed to follow along blindly because the red party says this or the blue party says that. You vote your values because you have value. Everyone has value. It's not about battling for control because, gentlemen, if you accepted any type of money, you are already paid and bought for. Therefore, the things that both of you gentlemen are talking about will never happen because you are bought. You are bought, you are paid, so anything that comes out of your mouths, gentlemen, will never happen because it doesn't affect or help the people that gave you money.
Thank you, Mr. Sandman. Mr. Stauber.
Thank you very much to David, the Chamber, Chuck, the Duluth News Tribune, and to Joe and Skip. I appreciate this healthy debate. You know, Minnesotans have played an essential role in this country, and we are not flyover country in the 8th Congressional District. In Congress, I want to support the pro-growth, pro-jobs agenda and unleash the economic engine in Minnesota's 8th District. In mining, I believe that we can mine safely, that we can mine iron ore, copper, nickel, and keep our environment safe. It will bring good-paying jobs to northeastern Minnesota and provide an economic boom that is so badly needed. And unlike Joe and Skip, I support President Trump's reversal of the mining ban. We all want affordable, accessible, and quality health care. And I believe it should be patient-driven, physician-guided, where no Washington bureaucrat should get in between the decision of the patient and their doctor, and of course it should include pre-existing conditions. But we don't need to get there with a full-throttle $33 trillion government takeover of our health care. We can do better. And I'm running for Congress to be a part of the solution. I've had a long, successful history of working with people with diverse opinions and various backgrounds. I'm running, and I want to get your vote. I want to earn your vote. And if you send me to Washington, I can guarantee that the only special interest will be you, the people. My name is Pete Stauber, and I would appreciate your vote. Thank you very much.
Thank you, all three gentlemen. This has been a very spirited, healthy debate, and we thank you all for being here with us. This concludes our forum, and now is a great time to show your appreciation.